And while NATO countries have finally signed a defense spending bill, and that is to ramp up its military budget ahead of the upcoming summit, with Spain as an exception. The Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sánchez refused to spend 5% of country's GDP on defense, calling it disproportionate and unnecessary. The claim by Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sánchez sets up a potential clash with U.S. President Donald Trump, who has pressured allies to commit to the figure as they meet for the two-day gathering at The Hague. Multiple diplomats at NATO said that the agreement set to be unveiled at the summit had gone through the approval of all 32 nations and that there was no exemption for Madrid. Sánchez, however, came live on national television saying he had struck an accord with NATO that would see his country keep respecting its commitments without having to raise the defense spending to 5% of its GDP.
The government of Spain has just reached an agreement with NATO, an agreement we consider very positive, which will allow us to fulfill our commitments with the Atlantic Alliance and preserve something very important, which is its unity, without having to increase our defense spending to 5% of the gross domestic product.
Spain had been the last holdout on a compromise deal that sees allies promised to reach 3.5% on core military needs over the next decade and spend 1.5% on the loser category of defense-related expenditures, such as infrastructure and cybersecurity. In his address, Sánchez announced that his government would allocate 2% of its GDP to protect NATO and Europe.
We choose to allocate 2% of our GDP to the protection of Spain, Europe, and NATO, while continuing to invest the rest in social policies, diplomacy, development aid, global trade, and also in our welfare state.
On Sunday, the Spanish Prime Minister wrote a scathing letter to NATO chief Mark Rutte, saying that committing to a figure of 5% of GDP would be unreasonable and counterproductive. The move by Sánchez had triggered a bitter response from Trump, who said that Spain was supposed to pay what everybody else was paying, and that NATO needed to deal with Spain. NATO diplomats now fear that Spain's position can undermine its show of unity with Trump in The Hague, which already risks being overshadowed by the U.S. decision to strike Iran. The outburst by Sánchez has also sparked fury from other NATO members who are desperate to keep Trump on their side after U.S. President had threatened allies to abandon them for spending too little.